We'd like to hear more from you on these efforts and how they link to justice.
Dear Olena, ladies and gentlemen, let me start with a short remark to show how times has changed. When I first met Olena in Riga in 2019, we were talking about healthy food for school children and about people-friendly cities. Now we are talking about war crimes. This is our new reality. So thank you for inviting me, and I know this conference is about law, about courts, but I'm not a lawyer, I'm a medical doctor, so I will talk from the medical side, but I have been working with women for more than 30 years. Right from the beginning of the war, Latvia provides support for both physical and psychological rehabilitation of victims, especially focusing on women and girls. Latvia has developed a center in Ivano-Frankivsk, as well as provided support for documentation of war crimes and advocacy of human rights. Latvia will continue to advance the globally accepted Women, Peace and Security program at home and internationally. Now the medical side. Sexual violence has been terribly used as a weapon by war by men in countless cases. Perpetrators use it to suggest power and dominance, but in reality it is a characteristic of cowardice and intellectual neglect. This global and timeless problem has been present in many conflicts, such as the brutal invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany, the rape of German female refugees by Russian soldiers, and the sexual violence that takes place in the Nigerian civil war or in Vietnam war. So we see this problem is global. Acts of war, such as the destruction of hospitals, schools, and critical infrastructure, aim to threaten and to demoralize populations. The same is true for sexual violence. Most of the victims of sexual violence are women and girls, but as we saw, of course, they are men and boys who also suffer from sexual violence in war, but to a far less extent than women and girls. Firstly, let us use the accurate term for the event in question. There is no special military operation happening in Ukraine, but war, and a war that includes sexual violence and rape. Victims should not be ashamed of what they have had to experience. On the other hand, the perpetrators, however, should be truly afraid of justice and the punishment they are due. Punishment will come quickly, hopefully, but it may take time too. For example, more than 70 years after World War II, there are still court proceedings against war criminals in Germany. 70 years after World War II. Now I would like to mention some medical considerations about sexual violence, although I know my list will not be complete. There are both visible and invisible consequences. There are short-term consequences and consequences that stay with the victim for life. There are deeply personal consequences, and there are consequences for a society as a whole. And there are consequences we can treat, and there are some which are fatal. The visible marks of sexual violence and rape include a variety of injuries, such as swelling, bruises, wounds, hematoma, tears, bleeding, fatal bleeding, fractures, nausea, vomiting, concussions. The invisible marks may include shame, anger, disgust, fear, and humiliation. And these are the primary emotional stages, but they may be followed by more severe and longer-lasting mental disorders, such as depression, anxiety, panic, suicidal tendencies, aggression, sleep and eating disorders, and emotional withdrawal from their former life, or unpredictable flashbacks. The short-term consequences are painfully physical injuries that can be treated, but the lifelong consequences might include sexually transmitted diseases like syphilis, gonorrhea, or HIV that could cause chronic pain, infertility, infertility with destroyed personal dreams for the woman, a lifelong dependence on medication, medical treatments, hospitalization, and death. A particularly significant lifelong consequence of rape may be unintended pregnancy, if abortion is not available. Every pregnancy should be a welcome and joyous occasion. The parents-to-be should be able to love their child from the beginning. No new life should be created when there is hate and humiliation on one side and fear and disgust on the other one. The consequences for society after a brutal rape of women might be the loss of their participation in civil society, the loss of their creativity and commitment in professional life, the loss of their energy to raise and educate their own children. I don't like speaking about people as human resources for a state's economy, but women suffering severe mental health issues after experiencing sexual violence are painfully missed in building and changing the social, cultural, and economic future of a nation. I'm absolutely aware that my list of consequences is entirely incomplete. But I have tried to describe what may follow after a crime that may have lasted only some minutes. It may be forgotten immediately by the perpetrator, but it could have lifelong consequences for the victim. Therefore, it is undoubtedly necessary that the war crimes committed by Russian soldiers in Ukraine, including the sexual violence and rape of Ukrainian civilians, should be brought to national and international courts. The victims deserve justice. It is not an excuse to be drunk. It is not an excuse to be frustrated by one's own miserable life. It is not an excuse to feel betrayed by one's own commander. There is no excuse for sexual violence and rape, and there never will be. Nowadays, we understand that victims deserve help. In former times, or in some other countries, victims are still told to forget, to keep quiet, to carry on with their life. And many of these women, they carry on with their life, but it is never again a truly full life. Victims deserve the help they need to heal, both physically and emotionally. This help should be offered in an unbiased and empathetic way. It should be available as soon after the crime as possible. It should be available as close to where the victims live, and it should be offered by qualified professionals, and hopefully in the victim's native language, because also the native language is very, very important for the victims. On the other side, the perpetrators, but also the higher-ranking commanders, should all know that their punishment is coming sooner or later. Before I finish, I would like to mention another Russian war crime. It was mentioned already yesterday, and it is very painful. It is the deportation and the forced crucifixion of Ukrainian children. This is not a physical rape, but it is a mental and an emotional rape. Sadly, we Latvians know what means a deportation. In 1941 and 49, Latvian children suffered deportation to Siberia. Now we have in Latvia published a very thick book. It is called Children of Siberia, and it is full with sad stories about lost childhood, about stolen possibility for education, about lost parents, about lost siblings. On the other hand, the Russian authorities should not be too sure that these children will forget their origin. Many neuroscientists suggest that early childhood experiences are stored in our brains throughout our lives and can be reactivated in unpredictable circumstances. We all know how smells, sounds, music, pictures bring back long forgotten memories. the so-called déjà vu and flashbacks. The fate of these Ukrainian children will not be forgotten. Dear friends, we need more women to take part in the peace talks. And we need more men to speak up against sexual violence. As a member of our Latvian delegation said, look at the panel. We are all women speaking about sexual violence. We need also men to speak up and against and condemn sexual violence. So thank you very much for inviting me. I think this conference is an important step towards condemning sexual violence. Thank you, Olena. She's my personal hero, and thank you all the participants.
Thank you so much, Madame Levites, also for highlighting the invisible long-term and societal impact